EOC Review, terms 101 to 120. Booker T. Washington was born into slavery, and he later founded the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. In 1895, he proposed the Atlanta Compromise, the idea that African Americans would accept segregation and white rule in the South as long as they were given free vocational training and enjoyed basic legal rights. Booker T. Washington mastered the nuisances of the political arena in the late 19th century, which enabled him to manipulate the media, raise money, strategize, network, pressure, reward friends, and distribute funds while punishing those who opposed his plans for uplifting blacks. His long-term goal was to end the disfranchisement of the vast majority of African Americans living in southern states, where most of the millions of black Americans still lived. Marcus Garvey believed that African Americans should build a separate society. He promoted African American businesses and encouraged followers to return to Africa to help the natives build a mighty nation. He started the Universal Negro Improvement Association in 1914. By 1919, Marcus Garvey and the Universal Negro Improvement Association had launched the Black Star Line, a shipping company that would establish trade and commerce between Africans in America, the Caribbean, South and Central America, Canada, and Africa. At the same time, Garvey started the Negroes Factory Association, a series of companies that would manufacture marketable commodities in every big industrial center in the Western Hemisphere and Africa. The Harlem Renaissance. It was a literary and artistic movement celebrating African American culture. It was led by well-educated middle-class African Americans who expressed pride in the African American experience. The Harlem Renaissance was considered to be a rebirth of African American arts, though it was centered in the Harlem neighborhood of the borough of Manhattan in New York City. In addition, many Francophone black writers from Africa and Caribbean colonies who lived in Paris were also influenced by the Harlem Renaissance. The heart of the movement included Jean Toomer, Langston Hughes, Rudolph Fisher, Wallace Thurman, Jessie Fawcett, Neela Larson, and Anna Bontemps. Fundamentalism. Fundamentalism is the idea that everything in the Bible should be taken literally. Clash over values leads to the Scopes trial in Tennessee, but received national attention. It was a fight over evolution and the role of science and religion in public schools and in American society. Fundamentalism was defined by George Martison.
The 19th Amendment granted women the right to vote. It was passed in 1919, and it took nearly 41 years for it to be approved by Congress. The Women's International League for Peace and Freedom was formed in 1915 as the Women's Peace Party. It was renamed in 1919 after World War I. It was thought of as the Treaty of Versailles was too vengeful. It moved the headquarters to Geneva, Switzerland, to be close to the League of Nations. It worked hard to bring together women of different political views and philosophical and religious backgrounds determined to study and make known the causes of war and work for a permanent peace. The Washington Naval Conference. It directed negotiations with several major powers to promote world peace. Held instead of joining the League of Nations, the U.S. also proposed a partial disarmament, which was reducing the number of weapons, and it was called by President Warren G. Harding and held in Washington in November 1921 to February 1922. The Four-Power Treaty. It was an agreement between the U.S., Britain, France, and Japan to respect each other's territories in the Pacific and to submit any disputes to a joint conference of all four nations. The agreement was worked out at the same time as the Washington Naval Conference, and all parties were told to maintain status quo in the Pacific. The Kellogg-Briand Pact. In 1927, 15 nations pledged to not use war as an instrument of policy. It permitted nations to engage in a defensive war and had no means of enforcement. It promised not to use war to resolve disputes or conflicts of whatever nature or whatever origin they may be, which may arise among them. The Roaring Twenties in Florida. Early 1920s, 300,000 Americans moved to Florida. The land boomed and dominated the Florida economy. A hurricane struck in South Florida in 1926, and the boom turned into a bust. Installment plans. People in the 1920s started paying for things with credit, and it racked up a huge debt. They were mostly paid off in installments with interest charges. As debt grew, spending slowed down.
Speculation boom. People began buying stocks to make quick profits, ignoring the risks. Many began buying on margin, only paying a down payment and borrowing the rest to pay for stock. Stock market continued to spiral upward based on inflated stock prices rather than companies' actual worth until the crash in 1929. Bull market. A stock market which steadily increasing stock prices. The term bull market is most often used to refer to the stock market, but can be applied to anything that is traded, such as bonds, currencies, and commodities. Black Tuesday. October 29, 1929, day the stock market crashed. In the following weeks, investors lost about $30 billion. Starts at a chain reaction that leads to the Great Depression. Smoot-Hawley Tariff. Passed by Congress in 1930, highest protective tariff designed to protect American farmers and manufacturers from foreign competition, but did the opposite, cut U.S. trade in half. The Dust Bowl. Hardest hit areas of series of droughts in the 1930s. Droughts dried crops and turned the soil into dust. Windstorms carried the dust hundreds of miles, and many farmers left their homes and headed west to California to find work. Bonus Expeditionary Force. World War I veterans and their families, 10,000 to 20,000, who arrived in D.C. to support the Patman Bill. After the bill was voted down, about 2,000 marchers refused to leave. President Hoover feared they might turn violent and had a force of 1,000 soldiers disperse the veterans. His reaction shocks many and helped him lose the election to FDR. It was led by Walter W. Waters, a former Army sergeant. Bank holiday. One of the first acts taken by Roosevelt to restore the nation's faith in the banking system. Banks could only reopen after the government inspected them and found them financially sound. Congress went further by establishing the FDIC, ensuring individual bank accounts up to 5,000. Agricultural Adjustment Act. Achieved higher crop prices by paying farmers to leave a certain amount of every acre unseeded, but more money into farmers' hands. 1936 was ruled unconstitutional. In 1938, a new act was passed, that put surplus crops in government storage until prices rose. Tennessee Valley Authority. Program that helps provide jobs, provide hydroelectric power, and control floods in the impoverished South. They constructed and maintained over 20 dams on the Tennessee River.